That's what I'm talking about. So here's the definition of a student that we're going to work with this morning. Okay, there are a lot of ways you can define it, but this is how we're going to define it. It says a student wants to know what the teacher knows. Maybe it's simply to get a grade or to complete the class or to get a degree or even maybe out of respect for the teacher. But that's what a student wants. He just wants the information out of the professor's brain so that he can then pass the test, so he can then get his degree, so he can then get out of the class, right? Or maybe he's curious. Maybe he just wants the information. You know, a lot of people like to be able to play Jeopardy later and have just useless knowledge in their heads. But a student is all about collecting information. A disciple is very different. And I thought the guys did a good job last night talking about this. A disciple is not interested in getting the knowledge out of the professor's head. The disciple would be interested in becoming the professor. You see, how many of you have been to an English class or a math class and you're in there and you're learning the math, you're learning the literature, you're learning whatever subject that they're giving you, but you have no aspirations of being that professor teaching someone else that subject? But see, a disciple is not an information collector. A disciple is someone who is trying to become just like the teacher. The Hebrew term for this was talmud or talmud. Y'all can correct me later if you've got a Hebrew scholar in the room. But the Talmud wanted to be just like the rabbi. Rabbi is the Jewish word for teacher. And so what we have, I thought y'all could relate to this. Got any LeBron fans out there? Y'all awake yet? So he wants to be like Mike, or so I heard. Y'all heard the popular, this was years ago before some of you guys were even watching basketball, okay? But there was this popular commercial series out. It was called I Want to Be Like Mike, right? And there was a song attached to it, and everybody wanted to be like Mike. And there were tons of these commercials. Well, now this is the latest one. LeBron wants to be like Mike. Some of y'all don't think that's funny at all. But don't worry, because everybody wants to be like Mike. You can see several stars all aspiring. Kobe Bryant is basically a little mini-me of Michael Jordan, right, in his game. So everybody wants to be like Mike. I'm here to tell you, you can have all kinds of different rabbis. They could be rabbis of basketball, rabbis of football, rabbis of hockey. Go Blues, right? You can have, are y'all awake? I said go Blues. All right. So you can have all kinds of rabbis. In Alabama, we have this guy named Rabbi Nick Saban, right? And he knows a few things about football. I had to put that in there. Go Blues. No, okay. So, but I want to talk just for a second, before we dive into the main text, okay, that I want to focus in on today. I want to teach you a little something about Jewish education and the Jewish education system, okay? What little, from the time they were 6 years old on into their teen years, what their education system looked like. And I'll tell you why I'm doing this in a minute. It'll make sense. Just bear with me. But here's a quote from Josephus, a famous Jewish historian. He says, above all, we the Jews, pride ourselves on the education of our children. An anonymous rabbi says something very similar and akin. He says, under the age of 6, we do not receive a child, but from 6 upwards, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox. And I mean, once they hit 6 years old, they're going to learn the Torah. We know the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. In Christianity, it's typically called the Pentateuch, right? The first 5 books. Most scholars attribute those to Moses. So at age 6, they start memorizing the Torah. They enter into this education system. Stage 1 of their education is called Beit Safar. This is from ages 6 to 10. By the end of their 10th birthday, okay, if they are on pace with what their teachers want them to do, they will have memorized the entire first 5 books of the Bible. I'm not talking about memorizing the names in order in a song. I'm talking about memorizing the actual contents of those books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Memorized by age 10. You say it's not possible. It is. You know, I was watching HBO just a few years ago, and they had this special on. It was like this competition, and little Muslim boys and girls were memorizing whole chapters and whole books out of the Quran. And they were reciting them. And it was a competition. Blew my mind. It's still happening today. But obviously our children maybe aren't doing that. We've maybe dumbed some things down, maybe not had such a commitment level that maybe the Jewish education system once upon a time had. By age 11, they enter Beit Talmud. From age 11 to age 14, they memorize not just the first 5 books, but they get Genesis all the way to Malachi. And now your minds are really blown. I'm not making this up. This is not an exaggerated preacher story. These kids by age 14 could literally recite the cream of the crop. Not all of them, okay? Just like today, you had some stubborn teens that don't want to do what they're supposed to do, all that kind of stuff. But the cream of the crop had it memorized by age 14, putting us all to shame. Then they would enter into this third phase called Beit Midrash, and this was only for the elite. And what would happen in Beit Midrash is the rabbis, all the popular rabbis of the day, would have a lot of these young Jewish boys very interested in taking them on as their rabbi, right? They want to learn, they want to be mentored by this rabbi, and so they're pleading, and they're saying, hey, would you give me a chance? Would you consider me? The rabbis had this process that they would go through. It's called Remez, and it's basically a quiz. The rabbi would have a series of questions that he felt like if someone were really serious and were really the cream of the crop, they'd be able to answer. The cool thing was they were a lot like Jesus. You read the scriptures, right? And a lot of people ask Jesus questions. What does Jesus very often do? He asks another question. That's what this process of Remez was like. So in other words, let me simplify it for you. So let's say the rabbi comes up to the little Jewish young man, 14 years old, and he says, hey, what's 2 plus 2? What would you say? 4. That's not what he would say. He would return a question and say, what is the square root of 16? And that's how he would answer the rabbi. It would illustrate to the rabbi that not only does he know the answer, but he can think about it in an abstract way, and he can now put it back in the form of a question. He really understands what the rabbi has asked. Now, of course, he didn't ask a math question. He would ask something related to the Bible. He asked something like, well, I think I have it up here. Nope, I don't have it up here. I thought, yeah, there it is. Okay. What are the 4 references in the book of Habakkuk to Deuteronomy in order? Go, Robert Cox. Seriously? All right, Wes, go. Wes, you got a Bible degree, right? Harding University? All right, can you answer it? No, you can't. I can't answer. Actually, I could, but because I looked it up, just so I would know. But anyway, listen, guys. A 14-year-old, are you feeling me? A 14-year-old had it. The cream of the crop, and it wasn't just one out of a million. He just hit the lottery, but this was common to be able to answer it, not just answer it, but answer it in the form of a question so that the rabbi had to think and process on his own too. Now, the rabbi, after going through this Remez process, this questioning, this quizzing, he would give one of two responses. It would either be, nice try, go and pursue your father's trade. That means you failed, okay? That means you didn't make the cut. Or he would say, popular phrase that you've heard even Jesus say, right? What? Come follow me. It was one of two things that he would say to this young 14-year-old boy. So why is this important? For the longest time, guys, I don't know if you've read through the Gospels, okay? 30 Days with Jesus, going through the Gospels. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I remember when I first became a Christian, I first started getting interested in the Bible, wanted to know what a disciple was, all this kind of stuff. I started looking at Jesus' calling of the first disciples. Something always struck me as odd. Look at what happens here in Matthew 4:18 through 22. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. What does that mean? A rabbi at some point said, go pursue your father's trade. They didn't make the cut. See, that was revolutionary to me because now it makes sense to me how Jesus could just simply say these 3 words, hey, come follow me, and suddenly, look what happens. At once, they left their nets and followed him. It goes on to say this. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and left their father and followed him. And the most peculiar of all the callings, I think, is this one. We have the least amount of information about it. Listen to this. It says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. And all he says is, follow me. Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. What? But you see, if we have a little bit of context to understand this, have y'all ever been the kid in this picture? Or seen the kid in this picture? Do you know what's happened to this kid? They have picked teams, and he wasn't picked. You been there? Raise your hand if you have been that kid. Don't be ashamed. We in good company, right? I've had a lot of haters in my day not recognize the game. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But listen, man, some of those kids I hurt, and I used to be one of those kids that picked the teams and left that little dude out. Let me talk to you teens for a second. If you've got the opportunity to make some kid's day, let me tell you, that's what Jesus did to his disciples. All of them were rejects. All of them were less than extraordinary. They were not the cream of the crop. In fact, when you hear Peter and John before the Sanhedrin, the people describing them, what do they say of them? They're like unschooled, ordinary men. But we can tell they've been with Jesus. And so, guys, this is important to understand. I want to start here. The call is for you first to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. That's the call. You don't get to wiggle and say, well, I don't know if I can do this. Macky, if a disciple is the guy that stands up there where you're standing and does what you're doing, or does what Robert does, or does what some of these other leaders are doing, I don't think I can do that. Baloney. Jesus picked the most unqualified. The Pharisees and the rabbis and the teachers of the law, they had all the cream of the crop on their side. Jesus says, no, I don't want them. I want these ordinary guys. Hallelujah. That he wants little old me and you. And he says, this is my plan to change the world. Can y'all imagine the Western All-Star team going up against, like the NBA Western All-Star team going up against, like, I don't know, some 8th grade team here at North Middle School or what, North High School? Can you imagine? How would that go? You would think, man, that's lopsided. It's not fair. But Jesus says, let me show you what I can do. Let me show you what I can turn that little runt of a team into. Let me show you the power that I can demonstrate through my spirit in these men. Listen, guys, hear me. Jesus picks rejects to be his disciples. He picks the ones that nobody else wanted to be his disciples. And I want us to start right there this morning. It's important. My title this morning is Disciple and Who is the Target. My lesson, maybe when you read that title, you thought he's going to talk to us about who we are supposed to reach out to. Well, that would have been a short lesson. Some of y'all would have been happy, but that would have been a short lesson because I would have just told you everybody. All right, I'm done. Drop the mic, right? You're an indiscriminate sower of seeds, right? You don't go and say, well, I think that's good soil. That's deserving of the seed. No, you don't do that. If you read the parable of the sower, he's scattering everywhere. It's indiscriminate. You don't look at somebody and, you know, I heard a guy describe this person he reached out to one time as someone who looked like he fell face first into a tackle box and came up and he had, like, you know, piercings everywhere. And he thought to himself, He'll never be interested in the gospel. This guy is presently, it's a real story. This guy is presently, he got over his discrimination, his prejudice there, and he reached out to the guy. And now this guy is a foreign missionary. He's reached countless people, and he's planted lots of churches. It's important that we understand what is our target. And when we say target, I'm not talking about who are you supposed to reach. We're talking about what is a disciple. If you don't know what a disciple is, how are you going to make one? And so this lesson this morning is to teach us, what does Jesus say a disciple is? And that way I can better know, how do I go out and make one? Number one, am I one? And how do I allow myself to become one? But then how do I make one if I don't have the right target? I want to start here, and this is where we're going to sit for a while. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 14. We're going to be here for a minute. Luke chapter 14, verse 25, and this is how it starts. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, now, this is so cool, man. I have this little picture up here called the Easter Sunday checklist. Now, some of y'all won't understand that. Some preachers might. See, because Easter Sunday tends to be the most attended Sunday service all over the place, all over the world. Okay? People that never darken the doorstep of a church, on Easter they come. And so preachers get real nervous. Preachers start spending a little extra time on their sermons for that week. Preachers start getting real sensitive and uptight about their ushers doing everything just right, and making sure the carpets and the walls have been painted and cleaned and all this kind of stuff. We want to make a good first impression. When the crowds get there, we've got to show them what they want to see so that they'll come back and maybe even bring a friend. That's our mentality. Can I tell you that Jesus doesn't think like us? And let me tell you, if Jesus is different than us and it seems crazy to you, can I tell you that he's not the crazy one? We are. Jesus turns to the crowds and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." That's not what he says. I'm going to give you 7 marks of a disciple from this text. Write them down. The first one is, a disciple loves the Creator more than the creature. In Luke 14, verse 26, as he turns to the crowds, he says this of all things: if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers, sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Wow. Guys, do you recognize that, so many of us want to turn over to Matthew and read that account where it says almost the same thing, except he doesn't use that mean word hate, and he says he loves less. And if you love this father or mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. But that's it's softer, it's easier to take. But listen, guys, I believe Jesus said this to the crowd. I believe he said it intentionally to get a gut-wrenching reaction from that crowd. He was not interested in telling them something easy to hear. He had an intention, he had a purpose, and he wanted to teach them something about what it means to be a disciple. And he says, guys, I have to be first. I have to be so much higher than any other person in your life. And he picked the ones that you would love the most. Now, I know some of y'all had rotten fathers. Some of you had rotten mothers. Some of you got rotten brothers and sisters. And some of them, you put up with them, you love them deep down, but whatever. But listen, do you understand what Jesus is trying to do? He's trying to take every possible person in this world that you would have any kind of relational attachment to, that you would really, really, really love. He's trying to say, yeah, your deepest affection, your deepest love, yeah, I got to be so up here that it's like you hate them. And guys, let me tell you, the only way that you can process this, I think, is to understand that you wouldn't have a mother and a father if it wasn't for Creator God. You wouldn't have a husband or a wife if it wasn't for Creator God. Everybody do this with me. On the count of 3, we're going to breathe in deep and hold it until I tell you to exhale. Y'all got it? Simple instructions. Ready? 1, 2, 3, inhale. Hold it. Now exhale. Do you understand? The only reason you were able to do that is because Jesus allowed it. Do you understand that? So when he says, man, you got to hate even your own life. Even your own life. You know, there's two words for life in the Greek. You know, there's one, they're kind of cool words. They're easy to remember, really. One is like psyche or like psyche, where we get the word psyche or psychology and all those kind of things. There's another one that's called pneuma. It's where we get the word for pneumonia. That's why it is often translated like breath. The one here is psyche. And what it represents is it's connected to your life, but it's like your decision-making, your heart, your mind, your life in that sense. Not just the breathing in and out, but it's deeper than that. And he says, man, you got to hate that thing compared to me. We got to love the Creator more than the creature. Look at what Jesus says. This is another reason why that's so important. Why do we have to hate mom and dad? Why do we have to hate all these family members? Look what Jesus predicted. And Luke 14, verse 25 says, do you think that I have come to give peace to the earth? No! Rather, I came to bring strife and division. What? Jesus came to what? He said it, not me. He said, from now on, families will be split apart. 3 are in favor of me, 2 are against me, or perhaps the other way around. A father will decide one way about me, his son the other. A mother and a daughter will disagree, and the decision of an honored mother-in-law will be spurned by her daughter-in-law. What does he say? He says, just my very presence and teaching and the nature of me calling you into a disciple relationship is going to split your family apart, because some are not going to want to go where you go. Some are not going to approve of your decision. Some are going to think you're loony. Some are just going to feel judged and condemned by your decision because they're not making the same one. Has anyone faced that? So Jesus is right. That's why he says, guys, you got to hate father and mother. He's not saying be mean, be nasty. And listen, some of y'all say, I got no problem hating my father and mother. Well, Jesus has a different message to you, okay, of forgiveness and grace and mercy. But here he's addressing our heart and our allegiance and our affection. If someone disagrees, will we stand with Jesus? If our closest person disagrees with us and gives us counter advice to Jesus, will we stand with Jesus? A disciple always chooses the Creator over the creature. The second mark of a disciple is that the disciple puts to death his or her desires. Notice what he says in Luke 14, verse 27. And whoever does not carry their what? Cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. He said, if you don't carry your cross, you can't be my disciple. He's not talking about wearing a chain. He is talking about literally, willingly picking up the instrument that will put you to death. How many people you know just walk around with a chain on with a cross? How many of you know somebody that walks around with a chain on that has a little electric chair? Not many, right? It's a symbol of where our Savior died in the most miserable, excruciating way. And he says, I don't want you to put it around your neck. I want to put it on your back. And I need you to do this. You know, Galatians chapter 5, look at this. Verse 24, those who belong to Christ Jesus have nailed the passions and desires of their sinful nature to his cross and crucified them there. In Luke 9:23, he clarifies this for us, because some of you say, well, man, I was baptized into Christ. That's where you die with Jesus, where you're buried with him, where you resurrect with him. I went through the death process. I crucified sin. Then why am I still stuck in it? Luke 9:23 answers that for you. It says, and this is Jesus still. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross, what? Every single day. The struggle doesn't end. It's not a one-time decision. You do make that one-time decision to enter relationship, but you make an everyday decision to stay in relationship. This once saved, always saved mumbo-jumbo of Calvinism is false, and it's not what Jesus taught. It's not what the Bible teaches in any shape, form, or fashion. And it's dangerous, because it hinders the daily repentance that it takes to stay saved. Third mark of a disciple. Disciples are not fans, they are followers. In Luke 14, verse 27, Jesus says, whoever doesn't carry their cross, we covered that, but then he says, and follow me. They can't be my disciple. And that phrase, follow me, doesn't mean kind of this, well, let me just tell you what it means, okay? It means more than that English word sort of conveys. It conveys the idea of I'm going to hold to his teaching. In John 8, he's talking to some Jews that believe him, at least for the moment they do. They get mad at him by the end of the story. But he says, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. What does it mean to hold? Does it mean I got my Bible in my hand, I hold it? No, it means that I know what it says. Yes, I've got it memorized. We're real good at that part, by the way, okay? We're real good at being smart in the Bible. But are we really holding to it? Meaning it's embedded not just in my brain, but it's in my heart. It went 6 inches down to my heart and it penetrated. Now it's flowing out of my speech and it's flowing out of my actions. I'm holding on to it. He says, that's when you're really my disciples. Luke 14:25 says the student, that's not right. It's that verse is wrong, so I apologize. I don't know it off the top of my head. What is it? Luke 6. We'll find it later. Ask me and I'll get it to you later. But Luke says, the student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. That's what a disciple is. It's not someone who just has, what is it? 6:40. There you go. Luke 6, chapter 6, verse 40. He says, when you're fully trained, listen, does being fully trained take work? Does it take getting your notepad out when the whole church is going through 2 Timothy and getting into it and working? Yes. When you got sports practice or you got homework or you got whatever going on, your job, and we come up with all kinds of excuses, guys. But Jesus says, if you're going to be my disciple, you got to hold to my teaching. You can't hold to something you don't know. And so when we have opportunities to learn, we have opportunities to grow, are you really investing yourself into those times? To be fully trained so that we can become just like our teacher, Jesus. That's what it means to be a talmud. That's what it means to be a disciple. In 1 John 2:6, it says, whoever claims to live in Jesus must live as Jesus lived. There's no way around it. I heard Francis Chan say something super funny one time. He's like, I told my daughter to go clean her room. 30 minutes later, what if she comes back and she's like, Dad, I memorized what you said. He said, hey, Rach, go clean your room. She says, I can say it in Greek. Later on, I'm having a small group come over to the house. We're going to talk about what it would look like if I cleaned my room. How's that going to go with the dad? No, it's not going to roll. It's not going to fly. If we claim to live in him, we got to not just know what he says and memorize it and be able to spout it off in the Greek. We got to do it. We got to become just like Christ if we're going to call ourselves disciples. There's this famous phrase. It comes from, I won't be able to pronounce this guy's name, but it's from the 2nd century BC. Some of the Jewish, I believe it's from the Mishnah. And he says, let your house be a meeting place for rabbis and cover yourself in the dust of their feet and drink in their words thirstily. There's this phrase that says, man, you're going to walk so closely behind your rabbi, either that or you're going to sit at their feet in the dust where they're walking around. Some way or another, the dust is going to get all over you because you're that close to that rabbi and you're so intent on getting to know him and becoming like him. So may you all be covered in the dust of your rabbi, Jesus. But I wonder, are you giving yourself an opportunity to even get a speck of dust on yourself? One thing Jesus won't do is chase a disciple. Got to be reciprocated desire. Number 4, we got to speed up. Fourth mark of a disciple focuses on the finish. That's what a disciple does. He focuses on the finish. Look at what he says. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees you will ridicule you, saying this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Guys, we got to have the end in mind. We're not, as a disciple, we don't start something without the goal in mind and without the resolve and the perseverance that it's going to take to finish. Otherwise, we're a mockery. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 8 says, finishing is better than starting. Philippians, the famous passage from Paul about pressing on. He says, Philippians 3, 13 through 14, he says, I focus on one thing, forgetting the past, looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. A disciple always focuses on the finish. The fifth mark, a disciple wages war and relinquishes reign. That sounds two counter ideas, but they're both present in this text. And if you read different commentaries, there are some that think that well, let's just read it and I'll tell you what they think. It says, or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? He's outnumbered. Sound familiar? Disciples are outnumbered in our world. He says if he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. Some commentators say, look, you're surrendering to God in this parable. Others say, no, this is the story of someone who didn't want to be a disciple and they surrendered to the world. So there's different takes on this passage. It doesn't really matter. Here's the point. A disciple always wages war. We're in a spiritual war as disciples for our hearts, for our minds. We're going to have a class later on today about choosing Jesus as our rabbi or choosing the culture as our rabbi. And I'm telling you, man, the full court press is on. Look what it says. He says both things here. He says both you're going to go to war and you're going to submit. Look what he says. So submit yourselves to the one true God and fight against the devil and his schemes. If you do, he'll run away in failure. Let's finish this out. Number 6, mark. Sold out and bought out. That's what a disciple is. He is sold out and he's bought out. Look what it says. Luke 14:33. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Sold out and bought out. Why do I say that? Jesus says this in Matthew 13:44. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered in a hidden field. In his excitement, he hid it again, sold everything he owned to get the money to buy that field. Everyone would think this guy is nuts. What did he do? He sold everything to buy something. He sold out and he bought in. I've been saying that wrong. He sold out and bought in. And now, something fun. Jesus says something very interesting here, and it's not disconnected from all these other points that he's been making on what a disciple looks like, right? And the commitment level that's required. Look at what he says. Salt is good. This is the very next sentence. Salt is good, but if salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Drop the mic. I love that, man. It's like, wow. What does that have to do with making disciples? What in the world? Salt is good. I agree. Some of y'all salt your salt. You love salt. But listen, this is probably not table salt, okay? This is probably sea salt that was sort of contaminated by some other minerals and some other elements and stuff. And so if you do a little research, you realize Jesus is not unscientific here when he says salt can lose its saltiness, because that's scientifically impossible, okay? But what he's describing is an event that happened very often, that that you would end up with this pile of stuff that looks like salt, and by all accounts you think it's salt, but it doesn't do what salt does. And so I got really curious this is a fresh insight. I don't know, Robert, if you've ever thought about this, brother, but for years I've heard lesson after lesson after lesson, and I've never heard this new insight that I've gotten. I've heard the lessons. Obviously, there's one commentator that gives you 14 ways that maybe we're like salt. 14 different ways. Like salt makes you thirsty. We need to thirst for the living water. And, salt preserves things. So we're here to preserve the earth and preserve the church and protect it from the corrupt world. And all these kind of things. And some of that is all true, right? And how do we know what Jesus' original intent was? I'm not sure that we can know exactly what he had in mind here with this parable. But here's a new one for me anyway that I ran across, and I thought it makes a lot of sense. Look at the text. It says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? But notice verse 35. This is what jumped off the page to me. It says, it is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It's thrown out. Well, what's not fit? The saltless salt is not fit. But that would imply almost that the salty salt, the good salt, the real stuff, might actually be fit for the manure pile. I never thought about that. So I did a little research. Do you know what? There's a lot of stuff written about this by some very smart people, like the head of the soil department at West Virginia University, one of the foremost experts on soil and fertilization, says salt is a part of almost every fertilizer. No wonder, maybe that's why Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth, and he didn't say you're the salt of the meat. It's blowing my mind. Never thought of it. And then he says, look, he goes on to say, look, man, if you add some salt, in fact, in World War II, the British actually took table salt as a backup because they didn't have anything else, and they sprinkled it into their garden, and it worked. And this goes all the way back to ancient times. They used it as a natural fertilizer. What does this have to do with being a disciple? Well, notice the 7th mark. We are to go as disciples. Do you agree? We're to sow, right? Do you agree? The Word of God. And we're to grow, both ourselves and to grow fruit in other people's lives, right? Have you ever thought about yourself as a big pile of manure? In a good way? But Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth. You're the salt of the manure. You're the salt that's going to help things grow in your world. I want to end with this. I'm out of time, but I'm going to do this. Last thing about salt. This is a good pack of salt, okay? Somebody open this for me. Maybe I can get it. You going to open? There we go. Okay, check this out. Good salt from McDonald's. You trust it? I do. Okay. Can y'all see the salt? Look at that. Nice, good salt. Tell me something. If I were to say, look, you've got to distinguish the good stuff from the bad stuff. Jesus has already identified there's bad, fake salt. Don't ignore Morton. They're bad, okay? Today they're bad. They're fake. This is good salt. If I told you, you have to distinguish, you've got to sort this out. How do you feel about me doing this? How's your job? Near impossible? Why would anybody do this? Why would anybody do this? That's a great question. Let me tell you, I'm going to end here. Listen. Churches all over our country do this. Let me tell you what we do. We like big piles of salt. We like chairs being filled with butts and people. We like this appearance of growth. Let me tell you guys, you can have an entertaining preacher with all the cutest little silly illustrations. You can have, I'm not saying I'm the most entertaining. That came out weird. But anyway, you can have the best preacher, Robert, back there, all right? And then you can have the best singing group, put both groups that we got here this weekend together. You can put all the hypest, most amazing, talented people and put on this great production, and crowds will come, and you'll have a big pile of salt. And do you know how many churches, guys, are not making disciples? And Jesus says this right here, what we celebrate and what we push for. He says it's not even good enough for crap. Make disciples. Know what the target is. Get fired up about what Jesus said his plan to save the world was. It is not to make big piles of tasteless, undiscipled salt. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. I'm done.
Check it out. Macky, I told my dad that was probably the